When the redbud trees are blooming, it's an exciting time. I think of redbud flowers as real food, not just a snack. I eat a lot of redbud flowers. I use them in cooking, but I also preserve them so I can use them throughout the year. I'm going to show you two of my favorite ways to keep redbud flowers across the seasons. One way is redbud vinegar, and the other way is pickled or fermented redbuds. First, I've got a confession. In a few videos, I've used preserved redbud flowers and called them fermented redbuds. Joy Bickerstaff and Kelsey Neal even asked me if I had a video on how to make fermented redbuds. This was supposed to be that video. But in putting it together, I realized these may be pickled redbuds rather than fermented redbuds. You can let me know in the comments below. But either way, these preserved redbuds are delicious. First, let's go out and take a look at some of the details that matter about redbud trees and harvesting that can affect your redbud vinegar and preserved redbud flowers. What's nice about eating from a redbud tree is that there are a lot of flowers. Nobody is going to pick too many redbud flowers. It's just not possible on a tree unless you're going to cut the whole tree down. Now, it's easy enough to stand out by a tree and harvest a few flowers for a snack or to put on a salad or just for one meal. And if you're picking redbud flowers from public lands, that's what you have to do. But if you have your own redbud tree, or if you have a cooperative neighbor with one in their yard, here's a plan for picking a lot of flowers that's worked well for me over the years. Do your annual pruning of your redbud in the spring when the tree is in flower. Even just a few branches can provide a lot of flowers, and it's definitely easier to harvest the flowers when the branches are on a table rather than you being up on a ladder. Redbud flowers grow in little clumps right off the side of a branch before the leaves come out. That's a key identifying feature of redbud trees. If you look close at the flowers, you can see how the flowers are attached to the tree and how sometimes there's a tough little woody base to that clump. It's like a little woody peg. At least for me, when I'm picking a lot of redbud flowers, it's impossible to not get some of these little woody pegs in with the flowers. Another thing to notice is how there can be unopened flower buds and fully open flowers in the same cluster. Some recipes for making redbud vinegar or preserving redbud flowers will say to use only the unopened flowers, just the redbud buds. I don't think that's practical unless you're going out at the very start of the redbud flowering season. But let's go to the kitchen to see what the trade-offs are in using the flowers or just the buds. You can see how tiny some of these first buds are. It takes a lot more picking to fill a jar with just little unopened buds. But you can also see how the little buds have a lot deeper color than the flowers. If you're making redbud vinegar, you'll get more color more quickly with just the buds, or you can use fewer buds. When you look at a fully open redbud flower, you can see how the flower petals are a lighter color. And you can see how the flower petals are not going to be as firm as the buds once they're preserved. The flowers are going to be more wilted than the tiny little buds. On the other hand, the flowers have something that the buds don't. Both the flowers and buds get their flavor from nectar in the base and from the flower petals. But the open flowers have something special, and that's pollen. You can see the pollen right there on the ends of the stamens. That pollen, though, is absolutely going to taste good. And that's why I don't wash my redbud flowers before I use them. I don't want to wash off that pollen. You can see how the buds are closed up. That means you can rinse the buds off with water and let them drip dry before you use them. The more important detail is to remove those little woody pegs at the base of any cluster of flowers. So after I pick a lot of redbud flowers, I spread them out to let any bugs have a chance to get away, and then I go through and pull off all of those little woody pegs. Maybe it seems like those little pegs are so tiny that they wouldn't matter, but I think they do if you're going to end up eating the flowers. It doesn't take that long to do, and I always end up with a surprisingly big pile of pegs and stems. If I take a shortcut and don't do this, I notice it in the end, and it's not for the better. So what's the bottom line? I think that even though the preserved redbud flowers won't be as photogenic as the cute little fermented redbud buds, or the redbud vinegar made with open flowers may be a little cloudy compared to when it's made with just the buds, I don't think it matters unless you're trying to win a ribbon at the county fair, or trying to have a picture-perfect meal where those little unopened buds look especially nice. All right, now that we have all those details out of the way, let's get to the redbud vinegar. I want to give a big thank you to Brenda over at Homesteading the Pioneer Way. I ran across her video on making redbud vinegar back in 2017. I'll put a link to her video down in the description below. This is the 4th year I've been making this redbud vinegar with her recipe, and it's just so good and so easy. All it takes is to fill a jar with the redbud flowers. Brenda uses a half a jar, and hers comes out great. Then just fill the jar with apple cider vinegar. Brenda uses Bragg's vinegar. I've used that and other brands too. They all turn out nice. But here's an important tip. That 100% apple cider vinegar can corrode the lid of your jar depending on how long you let it sit. So I don't put just a lid on these jars. First I put on a piece of plastic wrap or wax paper, or use a plastic canning lid like this old Tatler lid. You may want to leave the jar out where you can see it, and remember to turn it over every few days to make sure the vinegar and flowers get mixed together. Or you can just put the jar off in a dark pantry or in a corner and let it sit. The important part is to not let it sit out where it gets direct sun. Then the question is, how long should this sit? Well, it's up to you. After a week, the color will start leaching out of the redbud flowers or the buds into the vinegar. More and more color and flavors move from the redbud flowers to the vinegar as time goes by. You may want to use it just after a few days, or you may want to use it after 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I've even left it for 6 weeks. By that time, there's not much color left in the redbud flowers at all. Then all that's left to do is strain out the flowers and put the redbud vinegar in a glass container. You can squeeze out the flowers to get more of the vinegar if you want. But don't throw those flowers away. They may not look very good, but they are good, really good, especially on top of wild greens. Just as a quick example, here I'm using this batch on some common sow thistle greens. But remember, these redbud flowers are not preserved once they're out of the vinegar. I make a point to use them pretty quickly, within a few days. If you get tempted to use the vinegar and just leave the flowers in the jar, watch out. The flowers are going to turn gray when they're exposed to the air and not sitting in the vinegar. Maybe they haven't gone bad yet, but they get soft and don't look very good. The vinegar itself will keep its color and flavor for a few months, but don't save it forever. Enjoy it during the summer. That's when it's really at its best. Using the redbud vinegar is like using any other special vinegar. I've got a video that shows how I use this redbud vinegar to make a simple salad dressing to top a wild weed salad. I'll put the link down in the video description below and in the card up here. I'll compare the flavor of the redbud vinegar and the flowers that come out of it with the preserved flowers in this next part of the video. I'll do that comparison at the end, so stick around. So let's look at making these preserved redbud flowers, whether they're pickled or fermented. I start off the same way as with the redbud vinegar. I have a jar of buds or flowers, and then I add a salty brine, a solution of 1/2 white vinegar and 1/2 water, with 1/2 teaspoon of salt for every cup of solution. I've used white vinegar and I've used white wine vinegar, and they both turn out really good. I got the recipe from Lita Meredith's book, The Forager's Feast. I think the part that confused me is that she says to make sure the flowers are submerged under the brine and put the jar on a plate and leave it at room temperature for 3 days before putting it in the refrigerator. To me, that seems like what I do when I ferment elephant garlic leaves, but that's lacto-fermentation with only salt and the water that's in the elephant garlic leaves. This recipe has added vinegar. Whether it's white vinegar or white wine vinegar, that brine is going to be too acid for the lacto-fermentation to really happen. I will say that Lita Meredith calls these redbud pickles in her book, But I'll also say that these preserved redbud flowers act more like they've been fermented. The flavor of the redbuds gets more complex over time, like fermented things. And they don't stay crisp like pickles. They get softer over time once the jar's been opened up, more like fermented things. And after a few months, I do get a vinegar mother in the brine. So you can tell me, are these pickled or are they fermented? And if you have ever tried lacto-fermenting redbuds, let us all know in the comments. Next spring, I'm definitely going to try lacto-fermenting the flowers and see what happens. Until then, I'm going to enjoy my preserved redbud flowers, whatever they are. They really add a special twang to a meal. Here's a live taste comparison of these preserved redbud flowers and the flowers that come out of the redbud vinegar. Do they taste different? I like that. If you like the little saltiness. This one has apple cider classic vinegar taste. They're both good. They're just different. Sweet sour like vinegar, a little salty. They each have their own purpose. Put these in a potato salad would be great. These any place where you want a little saltiness. On top of some greens. Yeah, that's really good. Sweet sour, salty fermented. They're both really good. If you preserve redbud flowers, tell me and everybody else about it down in the comments below. I'd like to know. I hope things are going well at your place. Thanks for watching. Bye.